cover the different topics that we have set for today and dive a little more deeply into kind of how you can think about this entire process for yourself, right? And provide you some examples of how you may want to approach that. So with that in mind, what we're going to be talking about is just give you a bit of understanding about the early admissions versus regular admissions. I know some of you may be pretty familiar with the topics and the terminology, but I'm going to make sure that I cover that for you as well as why do these programs even exist? Why is there a difference between early and regular admission? We're also going to cover and maybe review for some of you how admissions officers make decisions, but also consider it from the lens of an early program, the early admissions process. And then, again, going through the making decisions and also specifically how the admissions officers in the process of reviewing applications, how they actually think about it, how I would have thought about it at sitting in my office looking at applications, for example. And then we'll cover a bit more about why starting early matters and the rationale behind that, how that impacts kind of your entire preparation. And then close out with how to plan yourself out a little bit better for your learning. And I know that as you mentioned, Rebecca is going to cover more about Kyros specifically. Programs exist in the first place. What is early admission versus regular admission? Well, let's start with, if you don't know the terminology, there's an earlier process. You can apply to certain programs earlier, and there is a more traditional process of admission that happens typically in the fall by December, January, but we'll cover the specifics later. In terms of why these programs exist, you may not know kind of how or why they come about, and there are a variety of reasons why, especially elite institutions, have these in place, and it applies to all institutions that have any form of an early program. But if we're thinking about it from the lens of elite institutions, there are different considerations. So when you think about early processes, what admissions offices are trying to balance is everything from workload to yield, meaning how many students actually choose to attend their institution, and also in terms of thinking about this process, okay? Some of you may be wondering, okay, well, how would I approach this process, right? And if I were sitting in the room looking at an application and I get a stack of applications, how would this work? And so let's look at this kind of set of examples that are here. These are all students who are admissible at top tier universities. Just keep that in mind, right? And so when a university is looking at students, and in general, but especially, of course, in the early admissions process, they're trying to keep in mind the entire applicant pool and the number of spots they have available. Now, the way that this might impact the early process is that at that point in time, your class is not filled. There's no limitations in terms of the space. Ostensibly, there's always some limitation in terms of space, but there is a sense of you're trying to find ultimately the best for undergrad. Now, talking about the wait list, right? I know that this is probably the most nerve-wracking decision, because we don't really know what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're admitted, but it doesn't mean that you're rejected. So how can you actually take action in a way that is useful? And I think that one of the pieces that vexes students is the uncertainty, but also really trying to understand, okay, I'm committed, I'm really excited about the school. How can I make sure that I'm putting myself in the best position to potentially get admitted? With regards to that, you want to definitely submit a letter of intent to enroll to the school that you're interested in, and do so, of course, assuming that you are planning to enroll. But if you want to make sure that you still have a chance, that is one way to kind of raise your hand and say, hey, if I'm admitted, I would be willing to attend. For some schools who are trying, again, to maximize yield, that is helpful to understand. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the reason they admit you, but it may be one of the reasons they take into consideration as to why you might be chosen off the wait list. In addition to that, you want to make sure that you're providing relevant updates that can elevate your profile. Some examples, I know that some students may have questions as to, okay, what does it mean? What's something that is going to make a difference from waitlist to regular decision for me to be admitted? And so what that might look like is maybe you participated in a competition, or maybe you initiated a new program at school, or maybe there was a family circumstance that came to play that impacted something that you didn't otherwise see. Or maybe, like we talked about in that specific example where the grades were on an upward trajectory, you actually had an improved academic trajectory. So you want to name all of those things and highlight not only the academic background, but anything in an extracurricular and personal level that you think is relevant and impactful in terms of making, helping the admissions officer make a case on your behalf. And again, when you are waitlisted, I think it still applies similarly to the rejection situation. You want to evaluate your application, evaluate your universities, and make sure you're calibrating that as best as possible when you have somebody else take